Ever wonder how someone can seem totally normal, like even charming, but underneath, they're wired completely differently?
Yeah, it's really a fascinating area of study.
We're talking about psychopaths today, right?
Right. And, for a long time, it's been so difficult to really put your finger on it, to identify them,
Yeah.
because they're so good at just blending in.
It's not like a checklist, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even traditional methods like those personality tests, they can see right through those.
They can fake it.
They're so good at mimicking those emotions that we typically associate with, a normal emotional response.
So if we can't rely on those outward signs, how do we even begin to crack the code of what's going on in the brain of a psychopath?
Well, think about this.
Okay.
Language.
Okay.
It can actually be a window into how our brains work, right?
Okay, I'm intrigued. How so?
So there's this area called the prefrontal cortex.
Right.
It's like the command center for decision-making, planning, and really important, inhibiting those impulsive behaviors.
Okay, so kind of like the brakes on our impulses.
Exactly. And studies have shown in individuals with psychopathy, this area is often different.
Different how?
They might have reduced activity in that area. Even structural differences have been observed.
So you're saying their brains are literally wired differently?
That's what the research is suggesting.
Wow. Okay, so their brains are different, but how does that translate into something we can actually see in action, something we can analyze?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. The prefrontal cortex is also super important for something called mentalizing, or theory of mind.
Okay, I've heard of that. It's like our ability to step into someone else's shoes, right? To understand they have thoughts and feelings separate from our own.
Exactly. And it's basically the foundation of empathy.
Okay, so where does psychopathy fit into all of this?
Well, researchers, these two guys, Hancock and Woodworth, they did this fascinating study.
What did they look at?
They analyzed the speech patterns of convicted psychopathic murderers.
Okay, so pretty intense subject.
And they compared them to, other murderers who weren't psychopathic.
To see if there was a difference.
And what they found was really striking. The psychopathic individuals, they used way more first-person pronouns.
Like I, me, my, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Way more than the non-psychopathic murderers.
So they're talking about themselves more? What does that tell us?
It suggests a real hyper-focus on the self, right?
Okay.
And a diminished capacity to kind of step outside of themselves and consider those other perspectives, those other inner worlds.
So even though they might be able to mimic emotions and blend in, their language reveals this underlying difficulty with empathy, with really grasping that other people have their own internal experiences.
It's like their brains aren't quite getting that concept, at least not on the same level as someone without psychopathy.
Fascinating. So their language is like a window into how their brains process social information.
Precisely.
It's like trying to understand a foreign language without knowing the grammar or vocabulary. You might pick up a few words here and there, but the deeper meaning is lost.
That's a really good way to put it. The words are there, but the emotional context, the understanding of other minds, it's just not quite clicking the same way.
And that can have profound implications for how they interact with the world and the people around them.
Absolutely. And it goes even deeper than just pronouns. They also found differences in how psychopathic individuals describe their crimes.
Oh, like what they actually say about what they did?
Exactly. They tend to use a lot of past tense verbs, almost like they're creating distance between themselves and the act.
Interesting. So it's like they're trying to detach themselves from what happened.
Yes, and they overuse conjunctions, like because and so, as if they're constantly trying to justify or rationalize their actions, even when those actions are, horrific.
It's like their brains are struggling to connect the dots between present action and past consequence in a way that most of us take for granted.
And that connection, that understanding of consequence, is crucial for developing things like remorse or guilt, things that keep most people's behavior in check.
It really challenges our assumptions about criminal behavior, doesn't it?
It really does. Because we often assume that a lack of remorse is a choice, a deliberate act of cruelty.
Right, like they're choosing to be callous.
But this research suggests it might be something much more fundamental, a different way of processing information, a different way of connecting with the world and the people in it.
A difference that's reflected in the very words they use.
Exactly.
It's mind-blowing when you think about it, how much our language can reveal about what's going on beneath the surface. This is all pretty mind-blowing stuff.
It is.
It's like we're really peeling back the layers on something that's like mystified people for centuries.
Yeah.
This whole idea of psychopathy.
Right. So where does all this research lead us? Like, what are the practical applications of being able to analyze speech in this way?
Well, I think the implications are huge.
Okay.
One area where it could be really valuable is in forensic psychology, right?
Okay.
Imagine being able to, like, analyze the language of suspects or witnesses
Right.
to really get a better sense of, are they telling the truth?
Yeah.
What's their emotional state?
Are they actually a danger to others?
Exactly.
So we're talking about potentially preventing crimes.
I mean, that's the hope, right?
Yeah.
If we can understand these tendencies better earlier on,
Yeah.
maybe we can intervene earlier.
Right. And it's not just about, like, catching the bad guys.
No, not at all.
This research could also have a big impact on how we think about treatment for psychopathy.
So let's talk about that because, so far we've mainly focused on identifying these individuals.
Right.
But if we can start to understand the underlying, neural mechanisms through their language,
Yeah.
could we potentially, develop more effective therapies?
That's the idea.
Okay.
If we're seeing these consistent differences in their language,
Uh-huh.
and we know those differences are linked to specific brain areas,
Yeah.
then it stands to reason that if we can target those brain areas,
Yeah.
maybe we can help them develop those capacities.
Wow. So you're talking about, rewiring the brain through language, essentially.
In a sense, yeah.
Are there any specific therapies out there that are showing promise in this area?
There are.
Okay, like what?
So one that's showing some really promising results is called mentalization-based therapy, or MBT for short.
Yeah.
What's the basic idea behind that?
So it's a type of psychotherapy,
Okay.
but it really focuses on helping people develop a stronger understanding of mental states,
Okay.
both their own
Uh-huh.
and other people's.
So it's like giving them the tools to decode those social and emotional cues they might be missing?
Exactly.
That's really interesting. And does it work?
Well, more research is always needed, but the early studies are pretty encouraging.
Okay, that's good to hear.
They're seeing improvements in things like empathy, emotional regulation, even a reduction in violent behavior.
That's huge.
It is.
I mean, it really gives you hope that even these really complex, seemingly intractable personality disorders, they might be treatable with the right approach.
Right, and I think it speaks to just how adaptable our brains really are.
And the power of language to kind of shape our neural pathways.
It's like we have this secret code within us, and we're just starting to figure out how to read it.
And rewrite it, baby.
And rewrite it. That's a good point.
Yeah.
It's both exciting and honestly a little bit scary when you think about it.
For sure.
But we have to be aware of the potential downsides, too.
Of course.
Right. I mean, with any new technology, there's always the risk of misuse.
Absolutely.
That's the thing with any powerful tool, right?
Yeah,
It can be used for good or for bad.
absolutely.
So how do we make sure we're using this knowledge responsibly? I mean, we're talking about potentially identifying psychopathic tendencies based on how people speak. It feels like a slippery slope.
It definitely is something we have to be really careful about. We don't want to create a society where people are afraid to speak their minds or, they're judged and ostracized because of their language patterns.
Right, like where any little slip up could get you labeled as a potential psychopath.
Exactly. And that's not what this research is about at all.
So how do we walk that tightrope?
Well, first and foremost, we have to remember that language is just one piece of a very complex puzzle, right?
All right.
It would be incredibly irresponsible, even dangerous, to use language analysis in isolation.
Right, so no Minority Report style pre-crime units based solely on someone's word choice.
Definitely not. We're talking about human beings, not robots. Context is everything. You
Yeah.
have to consider someone's history, their behavior, other psychological assessments.
It's about using this knowledge to understand, maybe even intervene early, but not to punish or prejudge.
Exactly. The goal is to promote empathy, to support people, not to create more fear and division.
This has been an incredible conversation.
It has.
It's amazing to think about how much our language reveals about our inner world, how our brains are wired.
Yeah, it really highlights that deep connection between language, the brain, and behavior.
And like you said, we're really just scratching the surface here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Who knows what other secrets we'll unlock as we delve deeper into this field.
That's all the time we have for today's deep dive into psychopathy and the secrets hidden in our language, but it's definitely given us all a lot to think about. Remember, knowledge is power, but it's up to us to use it wisely. Until next time, keep those minds curious.